September 2025. 2:17 p.m., Spokane Public Library, Washington. The building hums in a soft afternoon hush when a glossy page stops Nora Hale's hands mid-shelving. She doesn't breathe. She measures the air by the clock's second hand and the pulse in her throat. 18 years ago, in this city, a 19-year-old named Eden Hale walked out of her shift and never came home. What happened to Eden Hale? The file cooled, the leads collapsed, and time pretended to heal. Today, something cracks that calm. In 18 years, the story stayed buried, until this minute. One image, one mark, one impossible echo. Who put her back in plain sight? Nora sets the magazine on the counter as if it might bolt. Light from the clear-story windows stripes the cover. The world keeps its gentle rhythm, barcode beeps, the rubbery snap of book jackets, a child's laugh from the atrium, while her mind hurls backward. On June 14, 2007, at exactly 6:42 p.m., Eden texted a coworker, locking up daycare, "Be there by 7. Security footage shows a senior staffer waving her toward the north lot, a quick gesture, a casual errand, a door that opens tonight. After 7:05, the camera only sees darkness and a reflection of tail lights on wet asphalt. Nora remembers the call that didn't ring through, the message that waited on voicemail, the question that never stopped grinding her days into powder. She touches the page again. Her thumb hesitates over a violet shadow near a left eye, shaped like a petal in bloom. The shape is not a memory, it's a fact, fixed as gravity. She's traced that geometry on photographs, on dreams, on the brittle edge of sleep. If this is coincidence, it is cruel. If it isn't, every hour since 2007 just shifted under her feet. The library intercom crackles. A colleague asks if she can cover returns. Nora answers yes, though her voice arrives late, as if crossing a long field. She slides the magazine into a manila envelope, writes only a date and her initials. Routine is a raft. She stands on it for 3 minutes, maybe 4, scanning books, stamping cards, thanking patrons for coming in out of the crisp fall light. Then she steps off. She locks her station, logs out, and carries the envelope against her ribs like a living thing. Outside, downtown Spokane wears October, the air thin, the sky a clean burnished blue, leaves spinning along Main Avenue like small fires. Nora crosses to her car, counting her breaths. In the passenger seat she keeps a modest archive, a binder of police reports, a thin stack of news clippings, photographs that go from glossy to sun-faded to the pale ghost of paper. She opens the binder to the page with the name that once filled her house, her work, her sleep. Eden Hale, 19. 5'7". Brown hair, amber eyes. Distinctive port wine mark, left orbital, petal-shaped. Last seen, June 14, 2007. Nora reads the line the way you test a wound. It still hurts. It still tells the truth. She dials a number she promised never to delete. Lieutenant Ethan Garvey answers on the second ring, the low rasp of someone who has fought too many long days. She tells him the minimum, location, date, a visual match, and nothing that sounds like hope. He listens, asks her to come to the precinct or to wait where she is. Bring it in, he says, and don't share it. Not with anyone. Not even with herself, she thinks, because if she names it too soon, the ground will open again. On the drive, the city thins to cedar and light. Traffic slides past like a thought she can't catch. She keeps the envelope on the seat, her hand resting over it when she brakes, as if it might fall or float away, as if gravity needs help. She rehearses the rules she learned the hard way. Don't rush a lead, don't fight the evidence, don't bargain with time. But her body is already bargaining. The quick staccato of her heart, the way her foot presses the gas on the long stretch beside the river, the involuntary glance to the right where, years ago, a flyer fluttered on a lamppost until the weather ate it clean. At a red light she catches herself scanning pedestrians, making maps of faces. It's a reflex left over from the early months, when every woman at a distance might become the right height, the right hair, the right tilt of cheekbone. People told her to stop doing that. She didn't. She only got better at hiding it. She learned to hold a conversation and run a second one in her head. The catalog of features, the calculus of possibility, the slow addition of grief. The light turns green. She drives on. At the precinct garage, she parks between two patrol cars and lets the engine tick into silence. She presses her palm flat on the envelope. She lets herself imagine, just once, what it would mean if a photograph could return a person to the living, not by magic, not by rumor, but by the blunt, cold arithmetic of what a camera catches when it wasn't supposed to. She imagines a sequence of rooms, a door, a face, a name that hasn't been spoken aloud for years. She doesn't let the scene finish. She's superstitious that way now. She saves conclusions for evidence. Garvey meets her in the lobby, the gray in his hair more salt than iron, the edges of his eyes carved by long nights at short desks. He takes the envelope without opening it. "We do this quiet," he says. "We do it slow." She nods. Slow is how glaciers move. Slow is also how they carve mountains. In the interview room, the envelope lands on the table with an ordinary papery sound. Nora sits with her hands open on her knees. She watches the lieutenant slit the seal, slide out the magazine, and flip to the page that stopped her life at 2:17 p.m. A muscle jumps in his jaw. He doesn't speak for a moment. Then he looks up. The air changes. "Where did this come from?" he asks. "And how many people have seen it?" Nora feels the clock start all over again. She answers the first question. She knows the second is the one that will decide everything. Who else knows what this page might be hiding? Garvey keeps the magazine in an evidence sleeve and asks for the photographer's credit. Nora points to the masthead, the small sans serif line that most people skip. They don't. He has a tech call the publication while a clerk searches subscriber shipments to confirm the issue landed at the Spokane branch today, not yesterday, not next week. It matters whether the world intended this image to arrive exactly when it did. The call routes to a junior photo editor who speaks in careful, bright tones. Yes, the shoot took place across several farms in the Palouse. Yes, the photographer is Rhea Dalton. No, models weren't hired, they photographed real workers. The editor supplies a contact for Dalton and a production assistant who handled wayfinding. Garvey thanks her, ends the call, and leans on the table with both hands. "If we touch this wrong," he says, "it disappears again." They drive south before sundown. The city falls away to fields that ripple like muscle under light. Nora rides with the envelope in her lap and a silence that isn't empty. She keeps thinking of the second hand at 2:17, the precise way a day can break, not with a crash, but with a page turning. At a pullout above a swale, Garvey calls the production assistant, who confirms an address scribbled on a scout map, Hanley Acres, a well-kept operation whose owners prefer cash for short-term help. "That's common," the assistant says, "seasonal labor, no paperwork." Common doesn't mean clean. Garvey notes the names, the access road, the nearest cell tower, the fact that the assistant remembers a woman with a distinctive mark but can't recall which day. Nora's breath shortens. Memory is fickle, ink is not. The issue date, the shipping log, the credit line. Those will hold even if the witness doesn't. By twilight they're in the low, rolling country where wind writes its own script on cut wheat. Garvey, cautious about rattling a place that might bury what he needs, decides not to drive straight onto the farm. He wants a temperature check. Local watering hole? Nora asks, already scanning the darkening road for neon. A few miles on, a red sign flickers over a clapboard building with pickup trucks angled like habits. The Red Mill Tavern. Through the door, they step into fry oil, country music, and the easy territorial glance of regulars. The bartender looks up, young but practiced, a neat beard, clean knuckles, a name tag that reads Blake. The kind of face that registers strangers and decides whether to ask questions. Garvey orders coffee, black, and water for Nora. He keeps his shield tucked but visible if needed. He mentions the photographer first, not the magazine, not the mark. He asks if anyone came through with cameras a few weeks back. Blake nods once. "Yeah, got lost, asked for the Hanleys, I pointed a turn too far." His eyes hold on that last sentence, as if it weighs more than it should. Nora feels the room tilt by a degree. She says as little as possible, that she's looking for someone who might have worked nearby, that she wants to leave a note for the photographer if she returns. She doesn't say her daughter's name. She doesn't say the year. People tell more to questions that don't come with a story attached. Garvey lays down a business card. Blake doesn't pick it up. He points his chin at the back wall where local faces ride in frames above the bottles. One photo stops Nora, the kind of portrait you take when you don't expect anyone to study it, a woman in her 40s with a proud mouth and tired eyes. Beneath it, Marla Pritchard. Nora knows the surname before she admits it to herself. In 2007, a senior staffer at Eden's Daycare was named Marla Pritchard. The file says she died weeks later in Colville National Forest, ruled a suicide with an asterisk of doubt. It was the first thread that frayed and then stopped. Now the thread is on a tavern wall in the Palouse. "Your mom?" Garvey asks quietly. Blake nods. His thumb rubs a ring of condensation into the lacquered bar. "People come in here and tell me who she was," he says. "They never ask who she could have been." It lands like a riddle until you hear the grief in it. Garvey doesn't give him the story. He gives him the facts. A woman with a mark appeared in a national magazine, photographed on a farm a few miles from here, and that farm seems to prefer names that don't show up in systems. Blake listens, jaw working, eyes on the photo that does not stop aging. He tells them his father's name is Ron. He tells them Ron used to help place workers, a sentence that could charm or warn. He says there's a shed behind their place with old equipment that isn't worth selling and an answering machine that won't die. "If you want to hear our ghosts," he says, "you start there." He doesn't ask for a warrant because he isn't sure whether this is help or confession. Nora feels the hair rise on her arms. She thinks of 6:42 p.m., the text, the North Lot, the promise of being somewhere by 7. She thinks of what people do for money and what they tell themselves about mercy. They leave a tip that could buy a tank of gas and step into night. The air has the clean cold that makes sound carry. Garvey asks if Nora wants to wait while he checks the shed. She shakes her head. She can stand outside and hear the wind, or she can walk into whatever is next and hear that, and she knows which choice she will live with. In the truck bed behind the tavern, a cooler thumps as the compressor kicks. The sound is small but, for a second, it feels like a heartbeat. If cases like this keep you up at night, stay with us. Patience is how the quiet parts finally talk. Blake meets them out back with a key and a look that means he already knows there is no going back from the next door opening. The key is stamped with numbers, not letters, a habit older men have when they expect locks to outlast names. In the dark, Nora hears him say it once under his breath, as if reading the past into the present and daring it to answer. "Do you believe in accidents?" Blake asks, "or only in timing?" Blake leads them down a gravel alley behind the tavern to a narrow yard hemmed in by stacked pallets and farm implements that should have been retired a decade ago. The shed sits low and unassuming, a rectangle of corrugated tin with a door that sticks unless you lift as you pull. The key in Blake's palm is stamped with a short run of numbers, the metal brassed at the edges by years of use. He says nothing when he turns it, only breathes out once, hard as if forcing the lock to remember him. Inside is the layered smell of dust, diesel, and dry wood. A yellow shop light flickers on, revealing a workbench cluttered with neatly disordered life, baling twine, coffee cans of screws, a cracked voltmeter, a box of phone cords with the twist ties still on. At the back, under a tarp the color of old water, sits an answering machine the size of a sandwich, flanked by a stack of microcassettes in a plastic drawer. It looks absurd and indestructible at once, like a relic that refuses to forget. Blake plugs it in. The machine chirps awake, red LED steady, a small stubborn heart. He ejects the first tape and holds it between thumb and forefinger the way a person pinches a match before striking. "I don't know what you expect to hear," he says, then adds, softer, "but every time I try to throw this away, it hums at me in the trash." Garvey puts on latex gloves and takes the cassette. "Date," he says. Blake shrugs. "Mom wrote by groove count and habit." Third drawer has a paper calendar with ticks. Nora doesn't wait. She slides open the drawer, finds a dog-eared wall calendar from 2007 with pencil marks on a dozen squares and a single word written twice, fuel. She hands Garvey a tape that matches the week in June. He clicks it in. The machine whirs. A hiss fills the shed, then a woman's voice, low and urgent, spills out in breaths between breaths. Eden, don't go back to the center tonight. Meet Marla at the north lot. Don't call. Don't wait. The voice isn't Eden's, isn't Marla's. It's a third presence, familiar with their names. A man cuts in, close to the mouthpiece, like he's speaking sideways into a payphone. 5 minutes, he says. Green pickup. Keep your head down. The recording ends in the clack of a receiver and a faint, accidental sound. What could be a truck door, could be a hand on a hood, could be memory making facts out of noise. Nora grips the edge of the bench. She had told herself for years that clearer evidence would make it easier. It doesn't. The room shrinks to a square foot of air where her lungs can reach. Garvey rewinds and plays it again, then a third time, slower, noting the cadence, the static, the way the woman's voice flattens on the word, don't, as if pushing it through a narrow space. They work outward from the machine like divers from a line. In a tin bread box, Blake finds a pocket ledger with entries in Ron's scrawl, names, amounts, dates, and a shorthand column marked S. The initials repeat beside, Hanley, more than any other. Cash out, cash in, small sums that make a bigger story. Tucked into the ledger is a carbon copy receipt for dyed diesel from a grower's co-op 2 towns over, timestamped the same evening Eden vanished. The receipt number lines up with a freight log printed on thermal paper that has browned at the edges but still declares its ink. Garvey smiles without warmth. Logistics have no conscience. They remember what people forget. On the floor beneath the bench is a squat fireproof safe on casters, its paint chipped to primer, its handle wrapped in electrical tape. The stamped number on its face, 24,781, makes Blake pause. He used numbers for things he didn't want to call by name, he says. Garvey angles the safe forward and checks the underside. An extra key is taped in plastic where it's both obvious and invisible. He peels it free, slides it into the lock, and turns. The safe breathes open with a sigh that sounds like relief. Inside are envelopes fat with photocopies and a manila folder labeled intake in a hand that tries to look official and fails. The folder holds 3 pages, a blank employment application, a photocopy of a driver's license with a face blurred by 2 passes through a cheap machine, and a sticky note with a name written twice. The first line says Eden. The second says Mara, then Quinn, after, as if the last name landed later. Nora stares at the loop of the Q as if it could speak. The handwriting isn't hers. It belongs to someone who needed a label to fit a person they didn't deserve to name. Garvey photographs every page, every staple, the safe itself. He bags the ledger and the tape in separate sleeves. He asks Nora to step outside for air and then doesn't insist when she doesn't. Blake, pale, points to a shallow drawer under the bench where his father kept oddities. In it, beneath a fan belt and a coil of copper wire, lies a single Polaroid of a forklift's forks tucked under the corner of an industrial pallet, the kind used in cold storage. No faces, just the suggestion of weight moving where it shouldn't. On the back, in the same hand as the ledger, someone wrote, "Itch is settled when stable." Initials. Conditions. A euphemism that tastes like metal. A shoe scuffs the threshold behind them. Blake stiffens, and Nora turns before she knows she's moving. A tall man fills the doorway, hat in hand, jaw set like he's chewed on a secret too long. He looks from the safe to the answering machine to the photograph in Nora's fingers and doesn't ask a single question. He doesn't have to. "If you're opening that," Ron Pritchard says, voice rough as gravel, "you might as well hear why it was locked." Ron doesn't sit. He leans his shoulder into the door jamb like the frame is the only thing holding him up and tells it plain. He says he used to ferry workers for cash when farms needed bodies quick and didn't want paperwork, that Victor Hanley called more than most, that after Marla died he kept telling himself he was done, but that is a quiet jail that lets you sleep between sentences. When Garvey asks about the tape, Ron never looks at Nora. He says the woman on that recording wasn't Marla. It was someone who handled introductions when Victor wanted distance, a voice Ron never learned to name, the one that said meet at the north lot and keep your head down because the less you see the less you owe. He says he hates the sound of his own honesty. Then he tells them where to go if they want the truth to stand up in daylight. They caravan to Hanley Acres with the shed's dust still in their lungs. The farm sits on a gentle rise where wheat fields flatten into an apron of gravel, two long barns shouldering a white farmhouse with a porch too wide to be casual. Floodlights paint the gravel with hard light. Victor and Lila step out together like people who rehearse their exits. Victor is thick through the chest, farmer strong and careful with his eyes. Lila's hands are tucked into the sleeves of a cardigan that says hospitality and a jaw that says limits. Garvey keeps his voice even. He says they're here to make routine inquiries about a magazine shoot that used this property as a backdrop. He says he'll need to see where the production accessed, and he'll need to speak with anyone who worked that day. Lila says the crew passed through quickly and shot wide, no subjects. Victor says seasonal help comes and goes, and he doesn't keep track of who wanders into a photograph. Ron breathes out a tired laugh and calls it what it is. He says Victor doesn't track names because tracking cash is easier. The porch swallows the sound, but Lila hears the word cash like it has edges. She asks who brought the sheriff, and Garvey tells her it's just them for now, and it can stay that way if they don't have to come back with a caravan and a warrant. The lights hum. Gravel ticks under someone's weight. Somewhere a dog barks and is shushed. Nora feels a current under her skin the way you feel a storm before you smell it. Garvey asks to see the storage buildings. Victor leads them to a side door where a forklift's forks rest under a pallet of empty bins. The forklift's key dangles from a lanyard like a dare. The concrete shows old skid marks and one bright new curve of rubber that veers into a small annex off the main bay. In the annex, a magazine page sits torn to a crease on a work table, the edge feathered where someone ripped it fast. The photograph stops the room. Sunshot fields, a woman paused mid-task, hair caught in a breeze, a violet mark near her left eye shaped like something that once grew and refused to vanish. In the margin someone wrote 3 words that don't know whether they're a command or a prayer. Not her face. Nora does not speak. Her throat closes around the oldest thing she knows how to say and doesn't. Garvey asks who ripped it. Victor says he doesn't know. Lila says it must have been the stylist. They were making mood boards. Ron shakes his head like a man who has tried every lie on and found each one a size too small. He says stop. He says tell her you kept a worker off the books because she did the work of 2 and didn't ask for weekends. He says tell her you said it was for her safety, and maybe at first you believed it. Footsteps scrape concrete behind them. A woman steps into the doorway of the annex, sleeves rolled, hair tied back with a strip of red cloth. The light finds her face without permission. She looks past the men and settles on the only other woman in the room, and in that split second the air carries the past like a scent. The mark is not a suggestion, it is a signature. Nora's knees do not give. She finds a wall with her hand and keeps her voice steady because she has rehearsed this courage in every hallway she's ever walked since 2007. She says hello. She says her name. She does not say the other name. She waits. The woman straightens like someone bracing against weather. She says she's called Mara, and she works when the fields ask, and she doesn't know why strangers are in her space in the dark asking for photographs. Her tone is not fear. It is a warning disguised as calm. Lila steps between them quickly, offering tea no one will drink, a cardboard formality that tries to reset the scene. Victor tells Mara to head back to the house, that everything's fine, that they're just asking about the cameras and the property line. Mara looks at the torn page on the table, and something in her face flinches, so small Nora wouldn't have seen it if she hadn't trained her heart to be a microscope. Garvey lowers his voice until it fits right into the center of the room. He says they will return at first light with paperwork and friends if they have to, and the easiest night anyone will have is this one if the truth starts now. He nods toward a door marked cold storage, and Victor hesitates just long enough to write his own answer. Ron moves first, palms up, a peace offering no one asked for. He says the only way out is through. He says the thing he should have said years ago when the north lot was still just a parking space. He says please. The cold storage door sighs open, and the air that rolls out is sharp and sweet with produce, like the memory of summer in a locked room. Garvey steps in and follows the arc of that bright new tire curve as it disappears behind stacked bins and reappears beside a secondary pallet jack. He kneels and runs a gloved finger along a scrape in the concrete as thin as a paper cut. A small detail. A short story. A pattern that repeats when people build their own prisons and paint the bars to match the walls. He looks back at Nora and then at Mara, who hasn't moved. No one exhales. Why did the magazine find what you kept trying to hide? Garvey keeps the cold storage open long enough to let the air steady and then closes it again, like a pulse he intends to take later with better light and better tools. He asks for a desk, a chair, a quiet room where paper can outstare nerves. Victor leads them into an office that smells faintly of bleach and ledger ink. On the wall, a topographic map of the irrigation district runs a blue lattice over tan fields, each canal numbered like veins. Garvey pulls the map down and lays it on the table, weights the corners with a stapler and a tape gun, and begins to mark a path. Access road, bay door, cold room, annex. Then the co-op fuel station where the dyed diesel receipt from Ron's safe was stamped at 6:19 p.m. on June 14, 2007. He circles the canal spur nearest the north lot of Eden's Daycare, not because canals carry people, but because people like to move along the edges of things no one watches. Lila keeps her back to the file cabinet as if shoulder blades can hold a story up. Victor keeps his hands on the chair he refuses to sit in. Ron stands with his hat against his chest like this is a funeral with no sermon. Blake stays in the doorway, a witness to his family's inventory. Nora does not ask Mara anything. She watches the way Mara watches them, with a patience that feels learned, like you learn a new name by being told to answer to it enough times. Garvey calls a deputy in Whitman County and quietly requests a thermal drone and 2 units to block the main road if asked. He calls the co-op and asks for archived pump logs by receipt number, and when the clerk says the system is new, he asks for the paper backup every honest bookkeeper keeps because software forgets the year it was born. He calls a grain elevator manager 2 towns east. The thermal paper in Ron's safe says a pallet went in at 9:03 p.m. that same night for temporary staging. The manager, polite and wary, offers a ledger number and a shrug into the phone. The ledger line has no name, just an initialed note, HA overflow to temp A, settle when stable. Words that turn bloodless when typed. Mara touches the torn magazine page on the table the way you test whether a thing is still hot. She doesn't flinch this time. Her eyes stay on the image longer than anyone else's, as if measuring the cost of being seen. She says she stacks bins, runs the forklift, keeps a log on a yellow pad because the computer in the office times out too fast. She says she was here the day the photographer wandered up the drive, that Cruz asked for a wide shot of harvest life, and she kept working because people with cameras eventually find something else to look at. She says she was told it would be safer not to smile. Lila's face changes by a fraction, enough to register, not enough to decode. Garvey asks for the yellow pad. Mara nods toward the hook by the door. The pad is streaked with dirt and numbers. There is a run of initials MQ repeated across a dozen weeks, with piece rates and pallet counts that would impress an auditor. No address. No last 4 digits of a social. No signature except the loops of someone who learned to write where paper was a luxury. He turns a page and stops at the corner where a shopping list shares space with a sentence. North side drains slower. A fact about water. Or something else. Ron's voice breaks the quiet. He says that settle when stable meant keep the person until the debt to the lenders stopped growing teeth. He says he told himself it was a pause, not a prison. He looks at Mara without asking forgiveness because even he knows that would be an insult at this hour. Blake's jaw tightens. If a son can be born in the space between a lie and a truth, this is the look of it. Nora asks a single question, the one she's earned the right to ask. She asks whether Mara ever lived in Spokane, whether the words Sharp and Perry mean anything, an intersection near a daycare that never leaves her mouth without scraping. Mara's face does a small, dangerous thing. A flick that looks like muscle memory rather than thought. She says she remembers a bus stop with a bent sign that rattled in wind, a red truck with a dent in the tailgate, a text she drafted and didn't send because she was told not to be rude. The words come out like stones that have been held in the mouth too long. They don't splash. They sink. The drone hum arrives like a distant storm. A deputy streams thermal onto a tablet in the office. Rectangles of heat where refrigeration leaks, A soft signature along the annex floor where a pallet was moved recently, a path that arcs toward a secondary door lined up with the map's canal spur. Patterns align when no one wants them to. Garvey calls another number and asks for a portable DNA kit to meet them at dawn, a sample to compare to a hairbrush that has waited in a labeled evidence bag since a house was packed up and a room was left the way a 19-year-old left it. Victor reaches for the ledger before remembering it's no longer his. Lila says she wanted to keep Mara safe because there were men with debts who confuse people with payment. Her hands say she believed that until belief became habit. Garvey nods like he's heard this hymn in other towns where soil is God and paper is scripture. He doesn't tell them what he thinks of their theology. He asks Mara if she wants to step out for air. She says she lives here. She doesn't leave when strangers tell her to. The sentence lands like a claim. Outside, the fields are black on black. Somewhere a night irrigation pump kicks on and levels its own relentless syllable across the acres. Nora follows the sound with her eyes along the line Garvey drew on the map, tracking a route that makes terrible sense if you were 19 and obedient and taught not to make trouble. Dawn will take away some shadows and leave others. The good ones, the ones that hide you from harm, rarely stay past first light. What will she call herself when the test says what her face already knows? Dawn lifts over the fields like a slow confession. A state sedan pulls into the yard with a kit the size of a lunchbox and a nurse who moves like she's done this 100 times in harder rooms. Nora sits across from Mara at the office table, sleeves rolled, cheeks still damp from the cold storage air. There's no ceremony to it. A swab, a seal, a signature. Garvey signs too, then sets a worn evidence bag on the table like a relic. Inside, a hairbrush from a room in Spokane left exactly as a 19-year-old abandoned it. They let the machine hum. 30 minutes can feel like a season if you've trained your heart to listen for footsteps that never come. Ron waits by the window with his hat in his hands until the waiting becomes a sentence he can't finish. He tells Garvey that "settle when stable" wasn't a phrase he invented. It belonged to a lender who preferred labor over collateral, a man who found his way into farm kitchens via debts and never left through the front door. He says Marla believed they could clear it by moving a willing worker, for a few weeks, and then returning her. He says willing like it's a word that can be stretched. He says after Marla died, he kept going because stopping meant facing the ledger and the mirror. Blake listens to his father's voice with his arms folded, not in anger, but to hold himself together. There are men who teach their sons to fix engines and fences. There are men who teach their sons a silence that rusts everything it touches. The machine chirps. The nurse checks the readout, then checks again. She doesn't speak the number because Nora doesn't need it. She only needs the nod that follows, small and certain, something traded between women who understand proof without embellishment. Mara goes still, like a deer who has been told the forest is a hallway and the hallway finally opened. She doesn't stand. She doesn't cry. The word that leaves her mouth is the one she's been told for years to avoid. Eden, she says, as if testing the weight of a stone she buried herself. Nora gentles the space between them with her palms flat on the table. I'll call you whatever you ask, she says. We'll move at your speed. Garvey begins to move the case from heat to paper. Deputies escort Victor and Lila from the office one at a time, calm, firm, the way you lift a heavy box and keep your back straight. Lila turns once in the doorway. She looks at Mara like a woman checking the stove she forgot to turn off. We told you it was safer here, she says, less a defense than an old lullaby finally run out of tune. Victor offers a name for the lender and a 3-number code he kept in his wallet in case the debt changed hands. Garvey records it all and sends a wire to Spokane and to a task force that tracks money with more patience than men lend to one another. Paper moves. Doors open. Other farms will feel this morning's tremor before noon. In the quiet that follows, Blake steps forward with the microcassettes he didn't know how to carry until now. He tells Nora the voicemail voice, the woman who said meet at the North Lot, used to call the tavern on Tuesdays, always from payphones, always the same clipped goodbye. He admits he mailed an anonymous envelope to the magazine 3 months ago with a map and a note that said, if you want honest faces, take the back road. He thought the photos might do what he couldn't. The admission hangs there, difficult and brave. Sometimes the right thing needs a wrong door to get inside. Martin asks for air. Nora walks with her to the step, side by side, not touching, the way you walk with someone who just learned to name their own reflection. The fields are pale now, stubble shining under a sun that seems to understand it is not the hero of this story. Eden says she remembers the bus stop by Sharp and Perry, the bent sign, the petty worry about being late to a friend's porch. She remembers a hand on her elbow that felt like help until it didn't. She says she built a life from the pieces she was allowed to keep. She says she's afraid of the life that might come back because it will ask her to choose. Nora doesn't rush the answer. She says they can eat breakfast first. By noon, Garvey has a statement from Ron that connects names to initials and routes to receipts, a rope long enough to tie to out-of-state calls and warehouses where nobody ever asks why every pallet weighs more on Wednesdays. He doesn't know yet if the lender will be found on a ranch or a golf course or a boat, but he knows daylight does its best work after someone opens the door. He thanks Blake for unlocking the shed. He thanks Mara for the logbook. He thanks Nora for not turning the page and walking on. Behind gratitude sits a ledger of another kind, the one that keeps score of who showed up when it mattered. They eat at a diner in Pullman where the coffee is honest and the eggs never pretend to be more than eggs. Nora orders what Eden orders. They don't talk about the next call to be made or about a father in Colorado or about the house that still knows how the floor creaks at 2 a.m. They talk about wheat yields and the sound a forklift makes when it needs a new belt. They talk about the librarian trick for removing old labels without tearing paper. They trade little facts like bread. Grief is not a hole. It's a room you carry until someone agrees to sit inside it with you. When they stand to leave, Eden reaches for the door and pauses, half a breath, maybe less. "I'll keep Mara for work," she says. But when it's just us, Eden is fine. Nora nods, not because she approves, but because she recognizes a boundary made by a woman who earns her own names now. The bell above the door rings. Outside, the day has the bright, ordinary look of something that refuses to be a monument. Some cases break because someone talks. Some because someone looks. This one moved because a mother kept a room, a son unlocked a shed, and a woman chose to see herself in a photograph and didn't look away. The lesson isn't about justice with perfect edges. It's about patience with sharp ones. Keep the records. Share the quiet. Believe the small signs that won't leave you alone.